Hey everyone, got a fantastic question from one of the athletes, which is about nutrition and Ironman racing, and it definitely plays a huge part in your day. So, where do we start? I have a feeling that this might just be the first video of a series of videos, because as I go through this, I'm hoping it'll bring up more questions. You can ask me those questions and then we'll dive in deeper. So let me just start with saying that there are a lot of elements that can impact and affect what you eat, and especially how much hydration you have, and especially heat as well as the cold. If it's a really cold day, your body actually may be burning more calories to stay warm versus if it's a hot day. But as heat and humidity rise, your hydration is probably going to go way up. So if you're used to training in an environment that's 65 degrees and then you're racing in 85 degrees with 85% humidity, instead of drinking 1 bottle per hour on the bike, you may actually need to drink 2 bottles per hour. Wind will impact it, because if you're riding into a really strong headwind, your effort is going to go up, and it's going to require more out of you as far as especially hydration. Intensity the same way. So if you're doing your race and you're racing at a harder intensity, that's going to impact how much you're going to be able to absorb. And the flip side of that, if you're doing the race more aerobically, you probably can take in more calories. This is, I think, one of the main reasons why people get stomach upset in Ironmans, which is very common, is that their training days are easier than their races. And so in their training days, what works for them in training, as they get into the race, they amp up the intensity just from the adrenaline, and their stomach, their gut can't process the same either quantity of calories or the same types of calories. So one tip I'm going to give you, especially on the big brick workouts that I have on the schedule, try to treat those like mini races. So when you think about that intensity, you usually have to ratchet up your intensity in those, especially the bike ride, much more than you think, because that's going to happen naturally in the race. Along those lines, so make the most out of those training days. So when you have a big brick workout, think about what's going to happen at the race. Are you going to be staying at a hotel for the race? What foods are you going to have available pre-race morning? You may not have all the same foods that you have available at your house. Also think about timing, right? So in that race, you're probably going to want to have a pretty good sized meal, maybe like 500 to 800 calories, maybe 3 hours before the race. And so on these big workouts, if you're waking up at 7 a.m. and then starting your big workout at 8 a.m., that sets you up differently to process that morning meal before the big workout. And I know you probably don't want to get up 3 hours on your day off for that big workout, but at least once or twice practice your pre-race meal that you're going to have on race day, so you know how that works out. Because these training days are the times, this is your laboratory. These are the times to make experiments. These are the times to try different kinds of foods and find out if they work for you, if they don't work for you. Oftentimes, it's why people later in the race, especially, will go to more liquids rather than solids, because it's harder to digest the solids, and you may be able to take some solid foods earlier on in the race and less so at the end of the race. And you can practice that on these really long workouts. Okay, so on these workouts, you're looking at what's my meal routine going to be before the race, what's it going to be during, and then also take a look at your post-workout nutrition, right? So in general, there's a couple ways to do this. We can break down, how many kilograms you weigh and figure out how many carbohydrates you should have per hour based on kilograms. It's a lot of math. Most people don't like to go down that path, but if you do want to go down that path, let me know and I'll help you with that. So let me give you a really basic framework, a place to start, and then you start here, and then after these workouts, you look back on them and you say, how did I do? You know that you're not getting enough calories, which is typically the issue with most, especially first-time Ironman triathletes, is they'll go for a 3-hour bike ride or 5-hour bike ride, and I say, well, what'd you have? They say, well, I had, like 1.5 bottles of hydration, and that was it, right? So they got in maybe 150 calories on a 4-hour ride, and they needed to get in, probably 800 calories, right? And so their performance at the end of that both from a caloric and hydration standpoint, tanks. We've seen this just over and over again. Have athletes do these big workouts, tank early on, start playing with their nutrition so they get in enough calories and then especially get enough hydration. And then, magically they start feeling better at the end of these long workouts. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to practice, I want you to experiment, see what works, and keep tweaking it. So as a general rule of thumb, let me just tell you, you should be between 200 to 350 calories per hour. I would really like to have you start in the 200 to 250 range. And then for fluid, I would like to have you take one bottle, and a lot of the smaller bottles are even like 22 ounces now, so 22 ounces of fluid per hour, okay? And then the other thing is you do the math. So on these workouts, let's say you're gonna go for a 3.5 hour bike ride. I'm gonna make the math hard on myself. Okay, 3.5 hour bike ride. To start with, you're gonna have to go 3.5 bottles of fluid drink on your bike, which means that you're probably gonna have to stop at some point at a 7-Eleven or a park and fill up with water or buy some, some kind of Gatorade or something to refuel, okay? Along those lines, if you look at, okay, say we take 200 calories per hour and you're gonna be out there 3.5 hours. So that's gonna be 700 calories on the low end. And then if we go for 250, 3 hours is 750, half an hour is half of that, is 125, so that's 875. So between 700 to 875 calories, okay? So you look at what's in your drink, and then another thing I just thought of is you always want to think about and research what the course is serving, because if you like what the course is serving, that's just less food that you have to take yourself. You also want to know if what they're serving on course you absolutely hate and it doesn't work with your system. You want to keep going to water rather than the sports drink if you hate their sports drink, if that sports drink doesn't work with you digestively. So know what's on the course to know if you can go to it if you need it. So to start with on this ride, we're going to say, okay, in my sports drinks, let's just say for those 3 to 4 bottles, I'm going to have 200 calories, right? Okay, so now I need 500 to 675 calories. So now what I want to do is think about, okay, well, what am I going to eat on these? And if I like solid foods, myself, I've been known to eat a Snickers bar or two. That has 250 calories. So if I took 2 Snickers bars, that would be 500 calories. Now, if you live in a very hot environment, they're going to melt. So maybe I take some Clif Bloks. A shot of Clif Bloks is 200 calories. And then 3 Goos, that's 500 calories, right? So just do the math. Line it up on your counter and say, okay, this is X number of calories. And then when you get started, put those calories in your jersey pocket. So you start off in your ride and you have enough calories. Also take some money with you so that you can stop at a convenience store and pick up some food if need be. Same thing on the bottles, you want to think about that. And if you live in a very hot environment, where say you're training and it's 85, 90 degrees, then you probably want to bump up the fluid to maybe even 2 bottles an hour, right? So that's a lot of bottles and a lot more stopping. But also think about where you're racing. If that, ideally you want your training practices to mimic the race, both in topography of the course, heat, humidity, but that's not always the case. You live in one part of the country, you're racing in another part of the country, and you just can't mimic it, right? It's very difficult to mimic what it's like to race, say in Boulder at altitude when you train in Seattle at sea level, right? It's hard to do. Or if you're training in Seattle in 65-degree weather typically, and you're going to go race in 90-degree weather, that's hard to acclimate from that. So this is just a baseline of how to start. Another question that came up was, some people like to use powders. So I'll give you an example. I love Scratch. And so when I did Ironman Hawaii, I had an Aero bottle, which makes it really easy to drink. And I had, I think, 5 individual packets of Scratch in my jersey pocket. So I would get water as I went through the aid stations, and I would fill my Aero bottle up with water. And then I would take a Scratch and I would open it up and I would dump it in there. And then just riding along in the bumpiness, it would mix up the Scratch and the water, and then I would drink it. Now, the other way to do it is I've made a bottle concentrate. And so I take 1 bottle And let's say I want to get like 4 bottles of scratch out of that. So then what I do is instead of putting in 1 scoop, I put in 4 scoops of scratch and then fill it with water. And now that's super concentrated. So what I can do is I can just dump a quarter of that into my Aero bottle, right? And then I can grab a regular water from the aid station, fill it up. And now with that concentrate out of the water, it basically comes 1 bottle of scratch. And so on my frame, I then have essentially 4 bottles of my favorite hydration. And I just have to add water and I can keep riding to do that. Same thing if I was on a training ride and I knew where the parks were if I didn't want to stop at a convenience store. I have that concentrate bottle, and then as I go by parks, I just take a quarter of that bottle, put it in my Aero bottle, fill the rest with water, and then off I go. So that's an easy way to do it. And the big thing that you have to figure out is you have to figure out what is the consistency of the food that you like to eat. There's a great book called Portables, which is all about making your own food. And I used to make these waffle sandwiches that were filled with peanut butter and bananas, and they were delicious, but they also take an extra hour either the night before or the morning of the ride to make that and then wrap it up, right? So it's a bit inconvenient. That's where the whole sports nutrition industry came from. They started packaging this stuff, and a lot of athletes, there's a movement away from this stuff, more to more natural foods. But you have to figure out what works for you and what's realistic with you to take during the race. And even like you might like goo, for example, but you may only like 1 flavor. I'm that way. I love mint chocolate goo, and I can kind of stomach vanilla and everything else that I don't really like. So if they're serving goo on the course, I might be able to get away with it, but I know they don't have my flavor. So I might, on the race, pack more mint chocolate goo so I have it with me. Well, and then we can do another whole other topic on the special needs bags, what to put in the special needs bags, and definitely you can put some nutrition in there that will help you out. So I have some tips on that as well. We'll save that for another video. So this is a starting point. Please write down your questions, fire your questions at me, and so we can get into more detail and help you out specifically. All right, thanks.